The Montana wind cut through Catherine Morgan's wool coat like 1,000 frozen knives as her horse stumbled through the deepening snow. And she knew with a sinking certainty that she would die out here if she did not find shelter within the hour. She had left Fort Benton that morning in November of 1882, assured by the hotel clerk that the weather would hold long enough for her to reach the neighboring town of Cascade, where her aunt supposedly waited. The telegram had been urgent. Aunt Millicent was ill and needed family. Catherine had traveled all the way from St. Louis, her nursing training finally put to use for someone she loved. But the telegram had been a miscommunication, she discovered too late. Her aunt had already recovered and moved further west to Helena. The clerk had given her faulty directions, and now, 6 hours into what should have been a 4-hour journey, the sky had opened up with a fury that seemed intent on burying the entire territory under white. Her mare, a rented chestnut named Penny, whinnied nervously and tossed her head. Catherine could barely see 5 feet ahead through the swirling curtain of snow. Her fingers had gone numb an hour ago, even inside her leather gloves. Her face felt like it belonged to someone else, frozen and foreign. She was 23 years old, a trained nurse with a bright future ahead of her, and she was going to freeze to death in the Montana wilderness because she had trusted a careless hotel clerk and her own stubborn determination. Then, through the white chaos, she saw it. A dark shape, angular and solid. A building. Catherine's heart leaped with desperate hope. She urged Penny forward, and the mare needed no encouragement to move toward potential shelter. As they drew closer, Catherine could make out the structure more clearly. A log cabin, well built and sturdy with smoke rising from the chimney. Someone was home. She practically fell from the saddle when she reached the cabin, her legs barely able to hold her weight. She stumbled to the door and pounded on it with fists she could no longer feel. "Please," she called out, her voice cracking. "Please, I need help." The door opened so quickly she nearly fell forward into the cabin. Strong hands caught her arms, steadying her, and she looked up into the face of the most striking man she had ever seen. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and dark hair that fell just past his collar. His eyes were a deep brown, warm as whiskey, and they widened with concern as they took in her frozen state. "Good God, woman, get inside," he said, his voice a deep rumble as he pulled her into the cabin's blessed warmth. "You are half frozen. What in the hell are you doing out in this storm?" "My horse," Catherine managed through chattering teeth. "She needs shelter too." "I will get her," the man said, already moving past her. "You get close to that fire before you lose any fingers to frostbite." He disappeared into the blizzard, and Catherine stumbled toward the fireplace that dominated one wall of the cabin. The warmth hit her like a physical force, painful and wonderful all at once. She held her hands out toward the flames, and the sensation of blood returning to her fingers made her gasp. The cabin was larger than it had appeared from outside. One main room with a sleeping area partitioned off by a curtain in the corner. A simple kitchen area occupied another corner with a table and 2 chairs. Everything was neat and organized, the home of a man who took care with his surroundings. Pelts hung on one wall, and she recognized beaver, wolf, and bear among them. A rifle rested above the door, and various tools and supplies lined shelves built into the walls. The door opened again, bringing a blast of cold air and snow. The man entered, brushing white powder from his shoulders and hair. He was even more imposing in the full light of the cabin, ruggedly handsome in a way that made Catherine's breath catch for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. "Your mare is in the lean-to with my horses," he said, moving to a trunk against the wall. He pulled out a thick blanket. "She will be fine. You, however, need to get out of those wet clothes before hypothermia sets in. Catherine's medical training kicked in through her days. He was right. I cannot feel my feet, she admitted. His expression grew more serious. Frostbite is a real possibility. Here. He handed her the blanket and gestured to the curtained area. My spare clothes are in the chest there. They will be too big, but they are dry. Get changed and wrap yourself in this blanket. I will check your extremities once you are warm. You know about frostbite treatment? Catherine asked, surprised. I have been through 7 Montana winters, he said with a slight smile. You learn quick or you die. Now go before you catch your death. Catherine nodded and made her way behind the curtain. Her fingers were clumsy as she worked at the buttons of her coat and dress, but eventually she managed to strip down to her chemise and drawers, which were mercifully dry. She found a flannel shirt and wool trousers in the chest, both far too large, but warm and soft. She rolled up the sleeves and pant legs as best she could, and wrapped herself in the blanket before emerging. The man had been busy. He had set a pot of something over the fire and laid out what looked like medical supplies on the table. He glanced up as she approached, and something flickered in his eyes before he gestured to one of the chairs. Sit, he said. Let me see your hands and feet. Catherine sat, and he knelt before her. He took one of her hands in his touch gentle as he examined her fingers. His hands were large and calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard, but there was a surprising tenderness in the way he held hers. No blackening, he said after a moment. You got inside just in time. The circulation is coming back. It will hurt for a while, but you will keep your fingers. He looked up at her, and she was struck again by how warm his eyes were. You are a very lucky woman, miss. Morgan, Catherine supplied. Catherine Morgan, and you are Mr. Dalton, James Dalton, though most folks just call me Dalton. He moved to examine her other hand with the same careful attention. What brings a St. Louis nurse to Montana in the middle of a blizzard? How did you know I was from St. Louis? Catherine asked, startled. Your accent, he said with a slight smile. And the quality of your clothes, even wet and frozen. Plus, you carry yourself like a city woman. As for the nurse part, you mentioned checking extremities with the confidence of someone with medical knowledge. You are very observant, Mr. Dalton. Just Dalton, he corrected. And out here, observation keeps you alive. He released her hands. Now the feet. Can you remove your stockings? Catherine hesitated, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the situation. She was alone in a cabin with a strange man wearing his clothes, about to bare her feet to him. But the alternative was losing her toes to frostbite. So she reached under the blanket and rolled down her stockings, slipping them off. Dalton's expression remained professional as he examined her feet, though Catherine felt a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. His hands were sure and competent, checking each toe carefully. Same as your hands, he said finally. You will be fine. Keep them warm and elevated for a while. He stood and went to the pot hanging over the fire, ladling something into a tin cup. Drink this. It is just broth, but it will warm you from the inside. Catherine accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. The broth was rich and flavorful, better than she had expected. Thank you, she said. You saved my life. Dalton settled into the other chair, his own cup in hand. You would have died out there, he agreed bluntly. What were you thinking, traveling in weather like this? It was not like this when I left Fort Benton this morning, Catherine said defensively. The clerk said the storm would not hit until tonight. The clerk was wrong. Anyone who has lived here more than a season could have told you that storm was coming hours ago. The animals knew. The birds were gone by dawn. He studied her over the rim of his cup. So you were heading to Cascade? Yes, or I thought I was. I think I got turned around. Catherine sipped her broth, feeling warmth spread through her chest. My aunt supposedly needed me, but when I arrived in Fort Benton, I learned she had already moved on to Helena. I was trying to reach Cascade to catch the next stage west, but... She gestured vaguely at the window, where snow pressed against the glass. "You will not be reaching Cascade any time soon," Dalton said. "This storm is going to last at least through tomorrow, maybe longer. You are stuck here until it clears." The reality of the situation hit Catherine fully for the first time. She was trapped in a cabin with a strange man, unchaperoned, for at least a day, possibly more. Her reputation would be ruined if anyone found out. Then again, her reputation would not matter much if she were dead, which she certainly would be without Dalton's help. "I understand," she said quietly. "I am grateful for your hospitality, Mr. Dalton. I promise I will not be a burden." "Just Dalton," he said again, "and you are not a burden. You are a woman who made an honest mistake and got caught in bad weather. It happens." He stood and moved to the kitchen area, where he began pulling out ingredients. "Are you hungry? I was about to make dinner when you knocked." "Starving," Catherine admitted. She had eaten nothing since a hurried breakfast in Fort Benton. "Good. I have venison stew. Nothing fancy, but it is filling." He moved with efficient grace around the small kitchen, and Catherine found herself watching him. He was different from the men she knew back in St. Louis. Those men were soft, pale from office work, always concerned with appearances and social niceties. Dalton was hard muscle and sun-weathered skin, a man shaped by physical labor and the harsh Montana wilderness. There was something intensely appealing about his competence, the way he moved with purpose and confidence in his own space. "How long have you lived here?" Catherine asked, partly to make conversation and partly because she was genuinely curious. 7 years, Dalton said, chopping vegetables with practiced ease. "I came out from Ohio in '75, worked as a ranch hand for a few years, saved my money and bought this land 3 years ago. I run cattle, trap in the winter and mostly keep to myself. You not get lonely?" He paused in his work, considering the question. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I prefer loneliness to the wrong company. I had enough of that back in Ohio." There was a story there Catherine could tell, but she did not press. Instead, she asked, "What made you come to Montana?" "The same thing that brings most men west," Dalton said with a shrug. "The promise of something better, land of my own, freedom. A chance to build something without someone else telling me how to do it." He glanced at her. "What about you? What made you become a nurse?" "I wanted to help people," Catherine said. "My mother died when I was 15, and I watched the doctors and nurses care for her. Even though they could not save her, they gave her comfort in her final days. They gave our family comfort. I wanted to do that for others." "That is a noble calling," Dalton said, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. "The world needs more people who want to help rather than take." They fell into a comfortable silence as Dalton finished preparing the stew. The storm raged outside, wind howling around the cabin, but inside it was warm and peaceful. Catherine felt herself relaxing for the first time since leaving St. Louis. There was something about Dalton's presence that made her feel safe, protected. When the stew was ready, Dalton served them both generous portions, along with thick slices of bread he had apparently baked himself. Catherine ate ravenously, surprised by how good everything tasted. She said as much, and Dalton smiled. "A man living alone learns to cook or learns to eat terrible food," he said. "I chose to cook." "You do it well," Catherine said. "This is delicious. Thank you." He seemed pleased by the compliment. "So once you reach your aunt in Helena, what are your plans?" "I am not entirely sure," Catherine admitted. "I had hoped to stay with her for a while, perhaps find work in a hospital or clinic. St. Louis was becoming." She paused, searching for the right word. Suffocating. I needed a change. Montana will certainly give you that, Dalton said with a chuckle. Nothing about this place is suffocating, except maybe a blizzard if you are caught outside in one. Catherine smiled despite herself. I will try to avoid that in the future. They continued talking as they ate, the conversation flowing easily. Catherine learned that Dalton was 28, that he had left Ohio after his father died and left the family farm to Dalton's older brother, and that he had always dreamed of the open spaces of the West. Dalton learned that Catherine had studied at a prestigious nursing school in St. Louis, that she had 2 younger sisters still living back east, and that she had always been the adventurous one in her family. Adventurous enough to travel to Montana territory alone, Dalton observed. Your family must be worried sick. I sent them a telegram from Fort Benton, Catherine said. Though I suppose they will worry when they do not hear from me again soon. There is no way to let them know I am safe until the storm clears. We will get word to them as soon as we can, Dalton assured her. After dinner, Dalton insisted that Catherine take the bed while he would sleep on a pallet near the fire. Catherine protested, but he was adamant. You are my guest, and you nearly froze to death, he said firmly. You need proper rest. I have slept by that fire more times than I can count. I will be perfectly comfortable. Too tired to argue further, Catherine accepted. She retreated behind the curtain and crawled into the bed, which smelled of pine and something distinctly masculine. Despite the strangeness of the situation, she felt safe. Within minutes, lulled by the warmth and the sound of the storm outside, she fell into a deep sleep. She woke once in the night, disoriented and momentarily panicked. Then she remembered where she was and why. She could hear Dalton's steady breathing from the other side of the curtain, and the fire still crackled softly. The storm continued to rage, but she was warm and safe. She pulled the blankets closer and drifted back to sleep with a small smile on her face. When Catherine woke again, pale light was filtering through the window, though whether it was morning or just the reflection of snow, she could not tell. She lay still for a moment, listening. The wind still howled, but it seemed less intense than the night before. She could hear movement in the main room and the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed in Dalton's borrowed clothes again and emerged from behind the curtain. Dalton stood at the stove, cooking breakfast. He had changed into a clean shirt, his dark hair still damp as though he had washed up. He looked over his shoulder as she approached and smiled. Morning, he said. Storm is still going, but it should break by this afternoon, I think. How did you sleep? Better than I expected, Catherine admitted. That bed is surprisingly comfortable. I built it myself, Dalton said with a touch of pride. Took me 3 tries to get it right, but I think it turned out well. He gestured to the table. Coffee is ready. Breakfast will be done in a minute. Catherine poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the table. She watched Dalton work, noticing details she had missed in her frozen state the night before. The way his shoulders moved under his shirt, the strength in his forearms, the careful, precise way he handled the food. There was something deeply attractive about his self-sufficiency, his quiet confidence. How are your hands and feet this morning? Dalton asked, interrupting her thoughts. Catherine flexed her fingers. A bit sore but functional. No lasting damage, I think. Good. He brought plates to the table, loaded with bacon, eggs, and biscuits. Let me know if you feel any numbness or see any discoloration. Frostbite can be tricky sometimes. They ate breakfast together, and Catherine found herself enjoying Dalton's company more than she had enjoyed anyone's in a long time. He was intelligent and observant, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to her answers, something the men back in St. Louis rarely did. After breakfast, Dalton checked on the horses while Catherine cleaned up the dishes. When he returned, stamping snow from his boots, his expression was serious. "Storm is still too strong to travel," he said. "We are stuck here for at least another day, maybe two." Catherine felt a strange flutter in her chest that was not entirely dismay. "I understand," she said. "I hope this does not cause you too much trouble," Dalton said, genuine concern in his eyes. "Being stuck here with me, unchaperoned. I know how people talk. I am less concerned about my reputation than I am about staying alive," Catherine said firmly. "Besides, anyone who would judge me for seeking shelter in a storm is not someone whose opinion I value." Dalton smiled at that, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face and made Catherine's heart skip. "You are a practical woman, Catherine Morgan." "I am a nurse," she said. "Practicality is part of the profession." The day passed in surprising comfort. The storm kept them confined to the cabin, but rather than feeling trapped, Catherine found herself enjoying the enforced proximity. Dalton showed her his maps of the region, tracing the routes he used for his trap lines and explaining the geography of the area. She told him about her nursing training, describing some of the cases she had worked on in St. Louis. They talked about books they had read, places they wanted to see, dreams they carried. In the afternoon, Dalton taught her how to play poker using dried beans as chips. Catherine had never gambled before, but she found she had a knack for it, reading Dalton's tells and bluffing her way through several hands. Dalton laughed when she won a particularly large pot. "You are a card sharp in the making," he said, shaking his head in mock despair. "Remind me never to play with you for real money." "You are the one who taught me," Catherine pointed out, grinning. "You have only yourself to blame." As evening approached, Dalton prepared dinner while Catherine set the table. They had fallen into an easy rhythm, moving around each other in the small space with surprising coordination. Catherine found herself thinking how domestic it all felt, how comfortable, and the thought both pleased and frightened her. Over dinner, their conversation turned more personal. Dalton told her about his childhood in Ohio, about a father who drank too much and a brother who resented him. He spoke of feeling like he never quite fit in the life that was expected of him, of dreaming about the wide, open spaces of the West where a man could be whoever he wanted to be. Catherine, in turn, told him about the pressures of being a young woman in St. Louis society, where her value was measured by her marriage prospects rather than her skills or intelligence. She spoke of her mother's death and how it had changed her, given her a sense of purpose that did not involve finding a husband and producing heirs. "You never want to marry?" Dalton asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "I did not say that," Catherine said carefully. "I simply never wanted marriage to be my only option, my only purpose. If I marry, I want it to be because I found someone who sees me as an equal partner, someone who values my mind as much as my ability to manage a household." "That seems reasonable," Dalton said. "A man would be a fool not to value everything about the woman he married." Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, a current of understanding and attraction that made Catherine's breath catch. Dalton looked away first, standing to clear the dishes with movements that seemed a touch too deliberate. That night, as Catherine lay in bed, she found herself thinking about Dalton in ways that were decidedly improper. She imagined his hands, so gentle when examining her fingers, touching her in other ways. She thought about his smile, his laugh, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he found something amusing. She was developing feelings for him, she realized with a start. Strong feelings, far stronger than was wise for a woman who had known him less than 48 hours. But there was something about the isolation, the intimacy of their situation, that had stripped away the usual social barriers. She felt like she knew Dalton in a way that normally took months to develop. She had seen him in his natural element, had experienced his kindness and competence, had talked with him for hours about things that mattered. And every moment she spent with him, she wanted more. The next morning, Catherine woke to silence. The wind had stopped. She pushed aside the curtain to find Dalton already awake, standing at the window. "Storm is over," he said without turning. His voice was flat, emotionless. Catherine joined him at the window and caught her breath. The world outside was transformed, buried under several feet of pristine white snow. The sun was breaking through the clouds, making the landscape sparkle like diamonds. It was breathtakingly beautiful. It also meant she could leave. "I should start digging out," Dalton said. "Get the horses ready. You can probably reach Cascade by this afternoon if you leave within the hour." "Right," Catherine said, trying to match his businesslike tone even as her heart sank. "Of course." They worked in near silence, the easy camaraderie of the previous day conspicuously absent. Dalton dug a path to the lean-to and prepared the horses while Catherine packed her now dry clothes and cleaned up the cabin. Every movement felt heavy, weighted with things unsaid. When everything was ready, Catherine dressed in her own clothes, feeling confined by her corset and petticoats after the freedom of Dalton's trousers. She emerged from behind the curtain to find Dalton waiting by the door, her saddlebags in hand. His expression was carefully neutral. "Your mare is ready," he said. "I've given you some food for the journey and directions to Cascade. The snow will make travel slow, but you should reach town well before dark." "Thank you," Catherine said, her throat tight, "for everything. You saved my life." "Just being neighborly," Dalton said, but he would not quite meet her eyes. Catherine wanted to say more, wanted to tell him that the past 2 days had meant something to her, that he meant something to her. But the words stuck in her throat. What could she say? That she had fallen for him in the space of a blizzard. That the thought of leaving made her heart ache. It was ridiculous. Impossible. She took the saddlebags from him and their fingers brushed. The contact sent a jolt through her and she saw Dalton's jaw tighten. He felt it too, she realized. Whatever was between them, it was not one-sided. "Dalton," she began, not knowing what she was going to say but needing to say something. "You should go," he interrupted, his voice rough. "While the weather holds." Catherine nodded, defeated. She walked to the door and Dalton opened it for her. The cold air rushed in and she shivered despite her heavy coat. She made her way to where Penny waited and Dalton followed, helping her mount. From the saddle, Catherine looked down at him. His dark hair was tousled by the wind, his brown eyes finally meeting hers. She memorized his face, knowing she would carry this image with her always. "Goodbye, Dalton," she said softly. "Goodbye, Catherine." For a moment she thought he might say more, but he simply stepped back, his expression unreadable. Catherine turned Penny toward what she hoped was Cascade and urged the mare forward. She made herself not look back, though every fiber of her being screamed at her to turn around, to go back to the cabin, to the man who had shown her what life could be like with someone who saw her, truly saw her. She had gone perhaps 100 yards when she heard it, the sharp crack of wood splintering. She turned in the saddle to see Dalton standing in front of his cabin, one hand braced against the doorframe, his head bowed. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid set of his spine. He did not want her to go either. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt. She was leaving because it was what she was supposed to do, what was proper and expected. He was letting her go for the same reasons, but neither of them wanted it. Neither of them wanted the snow to stop, the storm to end, the spell of their isolation to break. Catherine sat frozen on her horse, her heart pounding. She thought of her life in St. Louis, of the expectations and restrictions that had driven her west. She thought of her plans to find her aunt, to seek work in Helena. All of it suddenly seemed hollow, meaningless. Then she thought of the past 2 days, of laughter over poker hands and conversations that stretched into the night, of feeling seen and valued and alive in a way she never had before, of Dalton's smile, his kindness, the way he looked at her like she was the most fascinating person he had ever met. She thought of what she had told him about wanting a partner, an equal. She had found that, here in this isolated cabin with this solitary cowboy. She had found exactly what she had always wanted but never believed existed. Catherine made her decision. She turned Penny around and rode back to the cabin. Dalton looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, his eyes widening in surprise as she approached. She dismounted before the mare had fully stopped, nearly stumbling in her haste. "Catherine, what are you doing?" Dalton asked, moving toward her. "Did you forget something?" "Yes," Catherine said, and then, throwing all caution and propriety to the wind, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. For a heartbeat, Dalton was frozen in surprise. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close, and he was kissing her back with a fervor that took her breath away. His lips were warm despite the cold, his embrace strong and sure. Catherine melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her heart soaring. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dalton stared at her with wonder and confusion and hope all mixed together in his expression. "What was that for?" he asked, his voice rough. "I do not want to go," Catherine said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I do not want the snow to stop, the storm to end, this to be over. These past 2 days have been the best of my life, Dalton. You have been the best part of my life. And I know it is crazy and impractical and completely improper, but I cannot make myself leave. I cannot make myself walk away from this, from you." "Catherine," Dalton said, and his voice was full of emotion. "I have been standing here for the past 10 minutes trying to convince myself to let you go, knowing it was the right thing to do and hating every second of it. I do not want you to leave either. I want you to stay. God help me, I want you to stay forever." "Then ask me," Catherine said, her eyes bright. "Ask me to stay." "Stay," Dalton said, cupping her face in his hands. "Stay with me. I know we have only known each other 2 days, and this is insane, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I am falling in love with you, Catherine Morgan. I might already be in love with you. And if you stay, I promise I will spend every day proving that this was not a mistake." "I am already in love with you," Catherine whispered. "I think I started falling the moment you opened that door and pulled me inside." Dalton kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, full of promise and passion. When they parted, he was smiling, really smiling, joy radiating from him. "So you will stay?" he asked, as if he could not quite believe it. "I will stay," Catherine confirmed. "Though we should probably figure out the practical details. I cannot just move into your cabin unmarried. Even in Montana, that would cause talk." "Then marry me," Dalton said simply. "I know it is fast, but this is the frontier. People understand that sometimes you have to seize the moment, take the chance when it comes. Marry me, Catherine. Be my wife. Build a life with me here." Catherine knew she should hesitate, should think it through, should be practical and sensible. But she had been practical and sensible her whole life, and it had never made her happy. This, Dalton, the wild leap into the unknown, this made her happy. This felt right in a way nothing ever had before. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Dalton let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her again, then pressed his forehead to hers. "You are sure?" he asked, vulnerability creeping into his voice. "You are giving up a lot. Your plans, your aunt, your life back east. I am not giving anything up, Catherine said firmly. I am choosing something better. I am choosing you. I am choosing us. I am choosing a life where I am valued and loved and free to be myself. That is worth everything. I will do my best to make sure you never regret this, Dalton promised. I know you will, Catherine said. She looked around at the snow-covered landscape, at the cabin that was now going to be her home, at the man who was going to be her husband. So, what do we do now? Now, Dalton said, taking her hand, we get you and Penny settled back in. Then, once the trail's clear enough, we ride to Cascade and find a preacher. We do this right and proper so no one can say otherwise. He paused, then grinned. Unless you want to wait for a big church wedding with your family present. No, Catherine said immediately. I want to marry you as soon as possible. We can write to my family afterward, explain everything. They will understand eventually. She hoped that was true, though she was not entirely certain, but it did not matter. This was her choice, her life. They led Penny back to the lean-to, then returned to the cabin together. Inside, everything looked different to Catherine now. It was no longer just shelter from a storm. It was home. Or it would be. I should probably send word to Fort Benton, Catherine said, the practical part of her brain catching up. Let them know I am safe, and to Helena so my aunt does not worry. We will handle all of that, Dalton assured her. Tomorrow or the next day, when the trails are clearer, we will ride to Cascade. We can send telegrams from there, talk to the preacher, get whatever supplies we need. He looked around the cabin. I am afraid this place is not much. I built it for one person, for a life alone. But we can add on, make it bigger. A proper bedroom, maybe a separate kitchen space for. For what? Catherine prompted when he trailed off. For a family, Dalton said, color rising in his cheeks. If that is something you want. I know you are a nurse, have your own career and ambitions. I do not want you to give that up for me. I do not think nursing and family have to be mutually exclusive, Catherine said thoughtfully. Montana Territory needs medical help. I could provide care for people in the area, maybe even set up a small clinic eventually. And yes, I want a family. I want children. I want to build a life here with you. They spent the rest of the day making plans, talking about the future with an excitement that felt intoxicating. Dalton described his land, the stream that ran through the property, the plans he had for expanding his herd. Catherine talked about the medical supplies she would need, the training she could provide to help people handle common ailments and injuries. That night, Catherine slept in Dalton's bed again, but this time he stayed with her, holding her close through the darkness. They did not make love, both agreeing to wait until they were married, but the intimacy of lying in each other's arms was its own kind of profound. Catherine felt safe and loved and certain of her choice in a way that erased any lingering doubts. 3 days later, the trails were clear enough to travel. Dalton and Catherine rode to Cascade together, causing quite a stir when they arrived. The hotel clerk who had given Catherine faulty directions was profusely apologetic, clearly relieved she had survived. Catherine assured him she held no grudge, though Dalton was less forgiving in his curt responses to the man. They sent telegrams, Catherine carefully wording the one to her family to break the news of her sudden engagement as gently as possible. She explained that she had met a good man, that she was safe and happy, and that she hoped they would understand and give their blessing. She knew the telegram would cause an uproar, but that was a problem for another day. The preacher in Cascade, Reverend Thompson, was a kind man in his 50s who had seen enough of frontier life not to judge the unconventional courtship. He agreed to marry them the following day, giving them time to arrange for witnesses and for Catherine to purchase a simple dress suitable for a wedding. The ceremony was held in the small church with the preacher's wife and a local rancher serving as witnesses. Catherine wore a blue dress that brought out her eyes, and Dalton had cleaned up, shaving and trimming his hair, looking handsome enough to make her heart race. The ceremony was simple and quick, but when Dalton slipped a plain gold band onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his days, Catherine felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson said with a warm smile. "You may kiss your bride, son." Dalton did, thoroughly, to the point where the Reverend cleared his throat in gentle reminder that they were still in a church. When they broke apart, both laughing, Catherine felt like she was floating. She was married. She was Catherine Dalton now, wife of a Montana cowboy, and she had never been happier. They spent their wedding night in the hotel in Cascade, finally consummating their marriage with a passion and tenderness that left Catherine breathless and amazed. Dalton was a considerate lover, attentive to her needs and her pleasure, and Catherine discovered a sensual side of herself she had never known existed. They made love twice that night, and each time felt like another level of connection, another bond forged between them. In the quiet aftermath, lying in Dalton's arms, Catherine thought about the blizzard that had brought them together. It had seemed like a disaster at the time, a potentially fatal mistake. Instead, it had been the best thing that ever happened to her. It had brought her to this man, to this life, to a happiness she had never imagined possible. "What are you thinking?" Dalton asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I am grateful for that storm," Catherine said. "For getting lost, for everything that brought me to your door." "Best blizzard of my life," Dalton agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I am also glad we have a warm bed in a hotel right now instead of my cabin floor." Catherine laughed, swatting his chest playfully. "Your cabin is perfectly fine. It is our home now." "Our home," Dalton repeated like he was testing out the words. "I like the sound of that." They returned to the cabin the next day, and Catherine began the process of making it truly hers. She reorganized the kitchen, rearranged the furniture to create more space, and started planning the additions they would build in the spring. Dalton watched her work with obvious pleasure, occasionally offering help, but mostly just enjoying seeing her make herself at home. Over the following weeks, as winter deepened, they settled into married life. Dalton taught Catherine how to shoot, insisting she needed to know how to protect herself when he was out checking trap lines. Catherine proved to be a decent shot, though not as naturally skilled as she had been at poker. In turn, Catherine taught Dalton more advanced first aid, showing him how to properly clean and bandage wounds, how to recognize signs of infection, and how to set a broken bone. They received responses to their telegrams. Catherine's family was shocked but ultimately supportive, though her father made it clear he wanted to meet Dalton as soon as travel permitted. Her Aunt Millicent sent a warm letter expressing her happiness and inviting them to visit in Helena whenever they could. Dalton's brother sent a terse note acknowledging the marriage but little else, which Dalton said was about what he had expected. Word spread through the scattered community about Dalton's new wife, the nurse from St. Louis, and people began to show up at the cabin seeking medical help. Catherine treated a child's cough, stitched up a ranch hand's gashed arm, and helped a pregnant woman through a difficult bout of morning sickness. She charged minimal fees, often accepting payment in the form of supplies or food, and quickly earned a reputation as someone who could be trusted with medical concerns. Dalton swelled with pride watching his wife work, seeing the way she cared for people with competence and compassion. He had married an extraordinary woman, and he knew it. He made sure she knew he appreciated her, helping however he could, always supporting her work even when it meant strangers showing up at their home at odd hours. Christmas came, their first as a married couple. They were snowed in again, but this time it felt like a gift rather than a trap. They exchanged simple presents, Dalton giving Catherine a medical bag he had ordered from a catalog, Catherine giving Dalton a new coat she had sewn herself from fabric purchased in Cascade. They made love in front of the fire, slow and sweet, then lay tangled together talking about their hopes for the coming year. "I want to start building the addition in the spring," Dalton said. "Add a proper bedroom and maybe a room you can use for seeing patients. Something more private than the main living area." "That would be wonderful," Catherine said. "And I would like to plant a garden, vegetables, but also medicinal herbs. I can grow a lot of what I need for basic remedies." "We can do that," Dalton agreed. He hesitated, then said, "I have been thinking about the future, about expanding the ranch. I could hire a hand or two, increase the herd. It would mean more income, more stability." "That sounds like a good plan," Catherine said. "Is there something else on your mind?" Dalton smiled at how well she could read him already. "I was thinking about children," he admitted. "I know we have only been married a few months and there is no rush, but I want you to know that I think about it, about you carrying our child, about being a father. It is something I want when the time is right." "I want that too," Catherine said softly. "And I do not think we need to wait. I am happy we are stable and I think we would be good parents." "You really think so?" Dalton asked, vulnerability showing through. "I know so," Catherine said firmly. She kissed him long and deep. "Let us see what happens. If it is meant to be, it will happen." As winter gave way to spring, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She knew the signs, of course, had seen them in countless patients, but experiencing them herself was entirely different. She told Dalton one evening in April as they sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "I have news," she said, taking his hand. "Good news, I hope," Dalton said, squeezing her fingers. "The best news. We are going to have a baby." Dalton went very still, his eyes wide. "Are you certain?" "I am a nurse," Catherine reminded him with a smile. "Yes, I am certain. The baby should arrive in early November as far as I can calculate." Dalton let out a whoop of joy that probably carried for miles, then swept Catherine into his arms, spinning her around carefully before setting her down and kissing her breathless. "We are having a baby," he kept repeating, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents." "We are," Catherine confirmed, laughing at his excitement. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Dalton said. He knelt down and pressed a gentle kiss to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your father is very pleased to meet you." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the tenderness of the gesture. "You are going to be an amazing father." "I am going to try," Dalton said, standing and pulling her close. "I am going to try so hard to be the father mine never was." True to his word, Dalton began working on the cabin additions with renewed vigor. He wanted everything ready before the baby arrived, wanted Catherine to have space and comfort. He hired 2 ranch hands, young men from Cascade looking for steady work, and the extra help allowed him to spend more time on the cabin while still managing the ranch. Catherine continued her nursing work through her pregnancy, though she had to turn away some of the more physically demanding cases as she grew larger. She spent her time preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, reading every book on childbirth and infant care she could get her hands on. The community rallied around them, with women stopping by to offer advice and gifts, creating a web of support that made Catherine feel truly part of this place. Her family wrote frequently, her mother sending packages of baby clothes and her sisters filling pages with excited questions. Her father sent money, insisting they use it to hire help or buy whatever the baby needed. Catherine wrote back faithfully, describing her life in Montana, assuring them she was healthy and happy and well cared for. Summer came, hot and bright, and the additions to the cabin were completed. They now had a real bedroom with space for a cradle, and a small room Catherine could use as an exam room for patients. Dalton planted the garden Catherine had wanted, and she spent peaceful hours tending the growing plants, talking to the baby in her belly about the life they would have. In September, Catherine's water broke earlier than expected while Dalton was out checking on the cattle. She managed to send one of the ranch hands to find him while she prepared herself, using her medical training to stay calm despite the fear that lurked at the edges of her mind. Childbirth was dangerous, she knew better than most, and being her own patient added a layer of complexity. Dalton arrived home in record time, pale and clearly terrified. "What do you need?" he asked immediately. "Tell me what to do." "I need you to stay calm," Catherine said through a contraction. "And I need you to help me. I have everything laid out, all the supplies. I am going to talk you through what to do." It was a long labor, lasting well into the night. Dalton followed Catherine's instructions exactly, fetching water, helping her change positions, supporting her through the pain. His presence grounded her, gave her strength when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. She had delivered dozens of babies, had coached dozens of women through labor, but doing it herself was exponentially harder. Finally, in the early hours of the morning as September became October, their son was born. Dalton caught the baby with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as the infant let out a strong, healthy cry. "It is a boy," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Catherine, we have a son." Catherine reached for the baby, and Dalton placed him carefully in her arms. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face, and her heart expanded with a love so fierce it took her breath away. This was her child, hers and Dalton's, the physical embodiment of their love. "Hello, sweetheart," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Dalton knelt beside the bed, one hand on Catherine's shoulder, one finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. "He is perfect," he said in wonder. "You did so well, Catherine. You are incredible." They named him Thomas James Dalton, after Dalton's father, hoping the name would carry better memories in this new generation. Tommy, as they quickly began calling him, was a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs and his father's dark hair. Dalton proved to be a devoted father, taking to the role with the same dedication he brought to everything. He was up with Catherine for night feedings, helped change diapers without complaint, and could often be found simply holding Tommy and staring at him in wonder. Catherine recovered well from the birth, and within a few weeks was back to seeing patients, though with a newborn now often strapped to her chest. The women of the community cooed over Tommy and offered to watch him when Catherine needed to focus on a patient, creating a network of care that made motherhood easier than she had anticipated. Life settled into a new rhythm. Dalton managed the ranch with the help of his hired hands, and the operation grew profitable. Catherine balanced motherhood with her nursing work, finding satisfaction in both. Tommy grew from an infant to a curious, active toddler who loved following his father around the ranch, trying to imitate everything Dalton did. When Tommy was 2, Catherine became pregnant again. This time, she carried a girl born in the spring of 1886. They named her Rose, after Catherine's mother, and she was tiny and delicate with Catherine's lighter hair and Dalton's warm brown eyes. Tommy was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her, and Dalton juggled 2 children with the same patient dedication he had shown with one. The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work. The ranch prospered, and Dalton hired more help, building a bunkhouse for the hands and expanding the herd significantly. Catherine's reputation as a skilled nurse grew, and people traveled from farther and farther away to seek her help. She trained several local women in basic nursing care, creating an informal network of medical support across the region. Tommy grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved reading and learning. Rose was all spirit and fire, fearless and adventurous, keeping her parents on their toes. When Tommy was 6 and Rose was 4, Catherine gave birth to another son, Samuel, who was quiet and gentle and loved animals from the moment he could crawl. Catherine's family finally made the journey to Montana when Samuel was a year old, and the reunion was emotional and joyful. Her father shook Dalton's hand and admitted that while he had been skeptical at first, he could see that Catherine had made the right choice. Her sisters were enchanted by the children and the wide, open spaces of Montana, though they admitted they could never leave the comforts of the city. As the children grew, Dalton and Catherine made sure they understood the value of hard work and education. Tommy showed an aptitude for numbers and helped his father manage the ranch accounts. Rose wanted to be a nurse like her mother, often shadowing Catherine when she saw patients. Samuel had a gift with animals and spent all his free time in the barns or the pastures. The cabin had been expanded multiple times over the years, growing into a proper ranch house with enough room for their growing family. Dalton had proven to be a skilled builder, and the house was sturdy and comfortable, filled with the warmth of family life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dalton took Catherine back to Cascade, arranging for his hands to watch the children for a night so they could be alone. They stayed in the same hotel where they had spent their wedding night, and after a nice dinner, they walked through the town, hand in hand. "You ever regret it?" Dalton asked as they strolled under the stars. "Giving up your plans, staying with me instead of going to Helena?" "Never," Catherine said immediately. "Not once. You gave me everything I ever wanted, Dalton, a partnership, a purpose, a family, a life that is mine to shape. How could I regret that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," Dalton said, "that I have not held you back." Catherine stopped walking and turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. "You have not held me back. You have lifted me up. Every single day you show me that I made the right choice. I love you, Dalton. I love the life we have built together." "I love you too," Dalton said, kissing her softly. "More than I ever thought possible. You are my whole world, Catherine, you and the children." They made love that night with the same passion and tenderness they had always shared, though it was now deepened by years of partnership and shared experiences. In the morning, they returned home to their children, to their ranch, to their life. The years continued to pass. Tommy went off to college in the East, determined to study business so he could help expand the ranch operations. Rose apprenticed with her mother, becoming a skilled nurse in her own right. Samuel took over more and more of the ranch work, showing a natural talent for animal husbandry. Catherine and Dalton grew older together, silver threads appearing in their hair, lines deepening around their eyes. But they were happy lines, earned through years of laughter and joy. The ranch was prosperous, their children were thriving, and they were still deeply in love. When Tommy was 22, he returned from college with a degree and a fiancée, a smart young woman from Boston who took one look at Montana and declared she wanted to stay forever. They married in the ranch house, the same Reverend Thompson who had married Catherine and Dalton performing the ceremony, now quite elderly but still spry. Rose married a doctor who had come to the territory and set up practice in Cascade. Together, they established a proper hospital, with Rose as the head nurse. She and her husband had 3 children, all of whom adored spending summers on their grandparents' ranch. Samuel never married, content with his life managing the ranch and caring for the animals. He built his own small house on the property, close enough to be part of the family but with his own space. He was happy, and that was all Catherine and Dalton wanted for any of their children. As they entered their 50s, Catherine and Dalton began to slow down. They hired a manager for the ranch, freeing up more time for themselves. They traveled, visiting Catherine's family in St. Louis and taking trips to see their grandchildren. They spent long evenings on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset over the mountains, holding hands and talking about their life. "Do you remember that blizzard?" Catherine asked one evening, prompted by the sight of dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "Every detail," Dalton said. "You pounded on my door, half frozen, the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I knew right then my life was about to change." "I was terrified," Catherine admitted, "of freezing, of dying. But then you opened that door and I felt safe. Even though you were a stranger, I felt safe." "You stayed," Dalton said, the wonder still in his voice after all these years. "You came back. I still cannot quite believe you came back." "I had to," Catherine said simply. "You were my future. I knew it even then. This life, everything we have built, it was all waiting for me in that cabin. All I had to do was be brave enough to reach for it." "We were both brave," Dalton said. "Brave enough to trust what we felt, even when it made no sense. Brave enough to build something from nothing." "From a blizzard," Catherine corrected with a smile. "From a blizzard," Dalton agreed, pulling her close and pressing a kiss to her temple. "The storm that night was fierce but short. A spring squall that dumped rain instead of snow." Catherine and Dalton watched it from the safety of their home, surrounded by the life they had created, and felt nothing but gratitude. The ranch continued to thrive under Tommy's business acumen and Samuel's practical management. Catherine eventually retired from active nursing, though she still offered advice to Rose and the younger nurses being trained at the Cascade Hospital. Dalton officially retired from ranch work, though he still went out to check on the cattle and horses most days, unable to fully give up the life he loved. They grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had weathered hardships, lost friends and family members, faced the challenges that any long life brings. But through it all, they had each other. The foundation they had built in those 2 days trapped in a cabin by a blizzard had proven unshakable. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. There was food and music and dancing, and speeches honoring the couple who had built such a strong family legacy. Tommy spoke of his father's work ethic and business sense. Rose praised her mother's compassion and dedication to healing. Samuel, always the quietest, simply said that his parents had shown him what real love looked like, and he was grateful every day for their example. When it was their turn to speak, Catherine and Dalton stood together, hands clasped, looking out at the family they had created. "We have been blessed," Dalton said simply. "More blessed than any two people have a right to be. We have each other, we have all of you, we have this land and this life." It started with a storm and a door opening, and it became everything. "The best things in life often come when we least expect them," Catherine added. "When we are brave enough to step into the unknown, to trust our hearts even when our heads say it is foolish. I got lost in a blizzard 40 years ago, and I found my way home. I found all of you." There was not a dry eye in the house as their children and grandchildren applauded. Later, after the party had wound down and the guests had departed, Catherine and Dalton sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. 40 years, Catherine mused. It does not seem possible. "Best 40 years of my life," Dalton said, "and I hope we have 40 more." They did not get 40 more, but they got close. Dalton passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, with Catherine holding his hand. He had been in good health almost to the end, still riding out to check the fences and feed the horses. His heart simply stopped one night, and he slipped away from life as gently as he had lived it. Catherine grieved deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, who surrounded her with love and support. She lived another 5 years, during which time she saw 2 great-grandchildren born and the ranch expand to include parts of 3 counties. She spent her final years writing down the story of her life, wanting future generations to know how it had all begun, how a blizzard had trapped her in a cowboy's cabin and changed everything. Catherine died at the age of 85, in the same bed where she had given birth to her children, where she had spent thousands of nights in her husband's arms. Her last words, spoken to Rose, who was holding her hand, were simple. "Tell them it was a good life. Tell them I was happy." And she had been. Against all odds, against all expectations, against every social norm and practical consideration, Catherine and Dalton had built a life of profound happiness. The blizzard that had trapped them together had been the beginning of a love story that spanned decades, produced a family dynasty, and touched countless lives. On the ranch, in a small cemetery on a hill overlooking the mountains, 2 headstones stand side by side. James Dalton and Catherine Morgan Dalton, united in life and in death, and carved on both stones, added by their children, is the same simple phrase: "The best things come from unexpected storms." The ranch still operates today, managed by the 4th generation of Daltons. The original cabin has been preserved, converted into a small museum that tells the story of James and Catherine. Visitors can see the fireplace where Catherine warmed herself, the table where they played poker, the bed where they first held each other through the night. And on certain winter days, when the snow falls thick and the wind howls, it is easy to imagine a desperate woman pounding on the door, a cowboy opening it, and 2 lives changing in an instant, because that is what happened. A blizzard trapped her in the cowboy's cabin. By morning, neither wanted the snow to stop, and from that simple beginning came a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, a testament to the power of bravery, trust, and being willing to embrace the unexpected turns life offers. The story of Catherine and Dalton is still told in Montana Territory, now the state of Montana, as an example of frontier romance and the kind of love that built the West. Schools teach about Catherine's contributions to frontier medicine and Dalton's innovations in ranching. But at its heart, it is simply a story about 2 people who found each other in the middle of a storm and chose to weather every storm after that one together. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on the ranch, still raise cattle and horses, still look out at the same mountains Catherine and Dalton loved. And on cold winter nights, when the wind picks up and snow begins to fall, they remember the story of how it all began. They remember the blizzard that brought 2 souls together and created a legacy that would endure for generations. Because the best love stories are not the ones that are easy or expected. They are the ones where 2 people look at each other and decide, against all odds, that what they have found is worth fighting for. They are the stories where a simple act of kindness, opening a door to a stranger in a storm, becomes the foundation for a lifetime of joy. Catherine had set out that morning in 1882 expecting to reach her aunt, to find work, to continue the life she had planned. Instead, she found something infinitely better. She found a partner who saw her as an equal, a love that fulfilled her in ways she had never imagined, a home in a wild, beautiful place, and a purpose that combined her skills with her heart. Dalton had lived alone for years, content with his solitude, asking for nothing more than his land and his cattle and his freedom. Then a blizzard brought him a half-frozen woman who would become his whole world, who would fill his life with love and laughter, and meaning beyond anything he had dreamed possible. Together, they proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the unexpected moments, the detours, the storms that force us off our planned path and onto something better. They proved that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that two people who barely know each other can recognize their perfect match, that bravery and trust can create something lasting and beautiful. The ranch house still stands, expanded and modernized over the years, but retaining the bones of the original structure. The bedroom where Catherine and Dalton spent their wedding night is now a guest room, carefully preserved. The kitchen where Dalton cooked that first meal for Catherine has been updated, but still occupies the same space. And the main room, where they sat and talked and played cards and fell in love, remains the heart of the home. On the mantel above the fireplace sits a framed photograph, one of the few ever taken of Catherine and Dalton together. It was captured on their 25th anniversary, and it shows them standing in front of the ranch house, his arm around her shoulders, her hand on his chest, both of them smiling with the kind of deep contentment that comes from a life well lived and a love well earned. They are older in the photo, marked by sun and work and years, but their eyes still hold that same warmth, that same connection that had sparked in a cabin during a blizzard decades before. Below the photograph is a small plaque that Catherine herself wrote late in her life. It reads, "On a cold November day in 1882, I knocked on a stranger's door seeking shelter from a storm. I found a lifetime. May all who seek refuge find such blessings." And that, in the end, is the true legacy of Catherine and Dalton Dalton. Not just the ranch they built, or the children they raised, or the medical care she provided, or the innovations he brought to frontier ranching. Their legacy is the example they set of what love can be when two people are brave enough to trust it, wise enough to nurture it, and strong enough to protect it through all the storms life brings. The blizzard trapped her in the cowboy's cabin. By morning, neither wanted the snow to stop. And from that moment forward, they built a life that was warmer and brighter and more fulfilling than any amount of sunshine could have provided. They chose each other, every day, for the rest of their lives. And in doing so, they created a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of unexpected beginnings and the magic that can happen when two hearts recognize they are meant to beat together. Their story ends not with their deaths, but with the continuation of their legacy. The ranch thrives. The family grows. The love they shared echoes through the generations, inspiring their descendants to seek the same depth of partnership and commitment. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the Montana mountains, you can almost hear them still, Catherine's laugh and Dalton's low voice, forever young, forever in love, forever grateful for the blizzard that brought them together and the choice they made to never let go.